Mr. Speaker, the proposed Foreign Interference Countermeasures Act is an important bill that could potentially better equip our nation to face up to the evolving nature of external threats in the 21st century. In particular, the bill seeks to better protect Singapore from the risks of foreign principal interference in our domestic affairs. This principle of non-interference per se is unobjectionable, and the Workers' Party stands behind the notion that domestic political matters should indeed be determined by our own people. But the proposed language in a number of areas spelled out by the bill are troubling. In this speech, I will provide justifications for the amendments that the Workers' Party has proposed in my name. These pertain to clauses that leave the scope of foreign interference troublingly vague and relatedly proposed an insufficiently steep hurdle for the applicability of the law, one that we believe begins to border on the policing of thought. The common thread among these amendments is that we need to satisfy a reasonable standard of proof and intent when we claim that an individual has acceded to the influence of foreign principles. Let me begin by stating a few propositions that I believe all in this House will have little difficulty agreeing with. We can all accept that there are threats out there that have to be dealt with. We can all accept that some threats are subtle and by design evasive, and hence difficult to identify and prove with absolute certainty. And we can all accept that establishing facts, even by the strict legal standards upheld in a court of law, will seldom be definitive. Memories may be hazy, claims may be contradictory. Even eyewitnesses could easily differ in what they perceive or believe to have observed from an event. Film classics like Rashomon and Virumandi, and parables like The Blind Man and the Elephant, remind us that objectivity may be elusive, even in fair, carefully litigated circumstances. Consequently, society and the legal system have allowed for a comparatively high burden of proof for claims and accusations, which, at the very least, requires a comparatively high probability of an outcome or event being true. We also have well-understood channels of appeal to allow for the possibility of overturning rulings that subsequently turn out to be false positives. But this does not appear to be the case in a number of clauses in this bill, notably the amendments we have proposed to parts of clauses 17 through 18, 40, and 75. Clause 17(1)(c), Roman numeral 3 of the bill, for example, will charge an individual with an offense if he or she engages in electronic communications that involve activity that, I quote, is or is likely to be prejudicial to the friendly relations of Singapore with other countries, end quote. But what is likely? The dictionary definition only states that something that is likely will probably happen or is expected. It does not attribute any probability to this likelihood. Statistically, any outcome that has the greater probability of being realized could be anything ranging from 51% to 99%. Thus, establishing that a given action will amount to an offense will require an estimation of a likelihood. While courts have a long history of attributing just cause based on strong, credible evidence, this is an enormous leap of faith for any single, largely unchecked individual. Mr. Speaker, nobody denies that foreign interference can occur, facilitated by the medium of electronic communications that could be prejudicial to the security, public good, domestic harmony, and international relations of Singapore. The desire to draft a law robust enough to capture such possibilities is a sound motivation. But at the same time, we cannot deny that the vast majority of such communications activity, even when framed in a manner that is potentially incriminating to its sender, could well be innocuous. The frivolous or unfiltered rantings of a troubled mind. Possibilities are insufficient, especially when they call for predictions of an uncertain future. Were this bill to be passed into law as it stands, will require not just that our ministers or relevant competent authorities speculate on the likely mindset and possible actions of individuals, but that such individuals themselves possess the ability to predict whether the information they communicate will affect security, public good, domestic harmony, or international relations. Experts can barely venture such forecasts successfully, much less an average person. Finally, it's worth adding that by further requiring, as in clause 17(1)(c), that an individual knows or has reason to believe already rules out the possibility of willful ignorance, piling on the need for this self-same individual to be speculative is excessive. In clauses 20 and 21, amendments were proposed to raise the level of proof required from mere suspicion or belief to at least some degree of evidence or actionable intelligence. This is justice on the basis of pre-crime, virtually straight out of the film Minority Report. It is the policing of thought. As much as I may be a fan of Tom Cruise and Steven Spielberg and Philip K. Dick, suspicion or a reason to believe does not rise to the level of actual crime, but represents anticipatory action. At its best, it runs the risk of abuse and misuse, short-circuiting the free will of individuals to change their minds before they act. At its worst, it rises to the level of thought policing, pinning on suspects actions that they have yet to be realized. Even conspiracy, a very indirect attribution of potential involvement in illegal activity, requires solid evidence. To be clear, the world can be an unpleasant place, and there may well be instances where the risk of subsequent malicious activity would justify the execution of preemptive actions that would preclude the possibility of even more insidious outcomes. But the threshold for us to engage must at least be one where we possess evidence, or, as called for in this bill, the amendments to this bill, actionable intelligence and a reasonable assessment of imminent harm. Short of this, we are relying on gut feeling and instinct to play with people's lives. One potential objection to this set of amendments is that the minister or relevant competent authority will always act judiciously and with care. This claims that, bereft of the flexibility to act on their suspicions, we will compromise the ability of our authorities to properly protect our citizens. But this calls for us to enshrine into law the propensity of a political office holder to always act in the public interest. This could well be the case today. But would it be always? What if, God forbid, an irresponsible party forms government, or someone in the government goes rogue? We are walking dangerously close to Manchurian Candidate territory here, and I know I'm citing a lot of movie references. The purpose of the law in any society guided by rule of law is to bind the hands of policymakers, regardless of their beneficence, from the most egregious exercises of arbitrary decision-making. Do these specific subclauses satisfy that standard, or should the language of the law be rendered as clear as possible? Furthermore, we cannot exclude the possibility that even an entirely well-meaning office holder may carry suspicions, even firmly held ones, that could well turn out to be erroneous. In the press release accompanying the first reading of this bill, the Minister of Home Affairs cited the example of, I quote, an abnormal spike in online comments critical of Singapore on social media in late 2018 and 2019. Yet two executives at one major social media platform, Facebook, have publicly stated that it has uncovered no cases of coordinated, inauthentic behavior by foreigners targeting Singapore since 2017. Given the apparent contradiction here, would the MHA share with this House why it believed that social media activity during that period was foreign influence? The proposed amendments to clauses 17.2 and 18.2 are meant to refine intent. While we agree that clandestine foreign interference may well involve multiple principles, expanding the applicability of the law to include instances where individuals, quote, need not have in mind any particular foreign country or principle, and, quote, veers uncomfortably into territory where we criminalize those who may have been deceived or misled. Yet, the explanatory notes of the bill clearly express that covered activities are, again I quote, not intended to cover circumstances where a person undertakes an activity with no knowledge, awareness, or direction from the foreign principal, or where the relationship between the person's activities and the foreign principal's interests are merely coincidental, end quote. Indeed, many disinformation campaigns operate via deception. Will we then charge those who have been unwittingly made to operate as pawns of a more sophisticated principle? Lest we rule out as the domain of the naive, and hence inapplicable to PSPs, it is useful to remind ourselves of how often even sophisticated experts may end up being duped. Just think of the victims of Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme, the NV Global nickel investment scam, or Elizabeth Holmes' Theranos, currently playing out in US courts. In the first half of this year, Singaporeans collectively lost a total of 168 million to conmen. To compound matters, allowing for such possibilities would be extremely costly in terms of resources. Think of the time, energy, and treasure that would have to be expended to investigate and prosecute cases where it's unclear whether any specific foreign actor is even involved. It could also give rise to either an excessive number of frivolous accusations or, conversely, inhibit actual victims from stepping up to alert authorities if they suspect they may have been manipulated. The Workers' Party believes that it's far better to strike the balance between efficiency and accountability by eliminating the most ambiguous language from the law, while subjecting cases corroborated by actionable intelligence to judicial scrutiny. The coincidence of interests, another dimension highlighted as note, remains poorly excluded by the overall language of the bill. Part Roman numeral 4 of clauses 5 and 48, where we have not proposed amendments, refer to the term collaboration, which is undefined but, as the notes explain, takes on its ordinary meaning. Well, we understand that the purpose is to capture nefarious collaborations, perhaps inspired by the case of former Lee Kuan Yew School professor Huang Jing. But such broad language raises both theoretical and practical concerns. For starters, there's very little reason why the simple act of working together, the dictionary definition of collaboration with a foreign entity, need give rise to subservience, or for that matter, even mild influence. I'm certain we all have had colleagues with whom we disliked, but yet were forced to work together on projects and would never imagine nor wish to emulate or even learn from. Hence, there's little logical reason why one would link collaboration with influence or, more intrusively, interference. Moreover, in any collaborative relationship, especially when parties carry equal standing, it's frequently impossible to attribute who actually exerts control. By a similar token, it would not be unusual for working relationships dealing with public policy to venture into politically sensitive, controversial, this is the wording in the bill, issues. Think matters such as climate change, vaccinations, free trade, and gender issues, all of which are controversial and often evoke partisan leanings, regardless of whether there may have been any intent to direct such effort toward a political end. This could have a chilling effect on already guarded national discussions by constraining the ability of our citizens to work with foreigners on matters of national importance, so long as they happen to be politically controversial. Taken together, including the exceedingly vague term collaborations into the scope of activities subject to FICA, becomes inherently problematic. Is it sufficient for us to claim that casual, transparent interactions do not entail collaboration, but deep engagement does? How much must one actually work with another before they are deemed to have collaborated? In his response to parliamentary questions filed by then NMPs Anthea Ong and Walter Serra on foreign influence, Minister Shanmugam explained that there is nothing to prevent politicians, political parties from engaging with foreign parties, but you cannot take money from them. To engage, however, includes the possibility of working with, and indeed even working for, somebody else. Surely it must bother us that we are choosing to define into our laws the possibility of catching, in Minister Shanmugam's words earlier on, a 1 in 1,000 chance, but glossing over the far greater likelihood of throwing up many, many more false positives. These theoretical observations are further compounded by the fact that in practice, Singaporeans routinely collaborate with non-Singaporeans on all manner of critical and non-critical operations. Top generals conduct joint military exercises on a regular basis, and we often send our best civil servants on overseas assignments where they may gather knowledge and experience from citizens of other nations. Our political office holders are often called to perform global public service, serving on committees in international organizations where they collaborate with high-level officials from other countries. Mr. Speaker, there are additional instances where intent on the part of the alleged agent remain uneasily vague. For example, Clause 5.3 states that activities will be covered as long as both person and the foreign principal knew or expected that the person would or might undertake such an activity. Surely it's possible that an individual might independently choose to pursue a given course of action, bereft of external influence, yet this choice could still be common knowledge. By a similar token, the definition of foreign principles may be excessively broad. While we do not wish to constrain the government's ability to act on a wide range of potential actors, the existing definitions of foreign business and foreign political organization could encapsulate perfectly innocuous ties. While we understand that malicious intent is subsequently captured by clauses 5 through 7, exclusionary language, especially for these two very general categories, may be warranted, something to the effect of a subclause that explicitly spells out how these entities are engaged in political activities. Alternatively, examples and counterexamples could be provided of businesses and political organizations that would be captured or not by said definition. Mr. Speaker, up till now, the proposed amendments we have flagged speak to what we as a party believe to be flaws of commission, notably instances where we believe the bill overreaches in its attribution of perceived risk, unwarranted suspicion, and intentionality behind motivations. In contrast, the amendments we have proposed for Clause 120 are one of omission, namely the fact that the Ministry of Home Affairs, namely the fact that the law fails to incorporate public assurances by the Ministry of Home Affairs. And the purpose is to ensure that these assurances are actually written into the law. This is notwithstanding how Clause 105.5 does provide accommodation for this by stating that competent authorities must not exercise any power under this Act for the purpose of furthering or harming the interests of any particular political party. Yet there's simultaneously language in the bill that will criminalize the diminution of government. Given how there's always, by definition, at least one political party in government, these proposed amendments serve to clarify some of the distinction in the text of the law, not with this current administration or minister, but potentially with future ones. Ensuring that political speech is legally protected goes beyond guaranteeing that citizens can speak freely about political matters that are near to their hearts. As a child, I learned how bo sompa, buay pasa. Children evidently intuitively understand the importance of codification of promises. The proposed amendments to Clause 120 essentially do the same for the guarantees promised by the MHA rather than leaving it to the vagaries of enforcement by the government in power. I shall close, Mr. Speaker, with a more general reflection on what FICA could mean for a globalized city-state such as Singapore. In our sitting just a mere 3 weeks ago, we spent enormous amounts of time debating on the merits of economic openness, both historically and for the future of the survival of our nation. This openness comes at a cost, of course, and is one that we must surely manage.
Mr. Jamus, if you can wrap up.
Yes, I have 30 seconds. Thank you. This month, we will debate how to manage threats from foreign interference, we must likewise not lose sight of the bigger picture, one where our people, companies, and policymakers are deeply and inevitably embedded in a rich mesh of cross-border relationships. I suspect and have reason to believe that FICA, as it is written, is likely to be inadvertently detrimental to our public interests.